Hi, I'm Adam and welcome to South Wales Ghost Watch. Now, on our show this evening we're going to be talking about King Arthur. Okay, and on the show again I've got Martin with me.
Right.
Okay, hello Martin. Now, King Arthur, who is King Arthur, Martin?
King Arthur, we think, historically, was a character who held up the Saxon invasion of England for 50 or 60 years. We think that King Arthur was a Celtic Roman general who, once the Romans left this country, was able to organise what remained as a resistor, if you like, of the Saxon invasions. So without if King Arthur hadn't have been there, we'd probably all be still living in, we still wouldn't get excited. There wouldn't be a Welsh rugby team because there wouldn't be a culture of Wales. King Arthur has a role in protecting and defending that old Celtic traditions that were pushed to the edges of the country. King Arthur was a figure who was probably fought on horseback, had a group of mounted knights, and organised the remaining bit of Celtic Christianity, and was probably, we think, in what was known as West Wales, which is not the bit that we always associate with West Wales, but was Cornwall, Devon and so on. The old name for that area was West Wales. So Arthur fulfills a very important historical role in protecting that Roman Celtic tradition. Because let's remember, the Romans had been there for 400 years. They'd educated a lot of the local people into Roman ways, civilization, learning Latin, so on. And Arthur was therefore a figure who was not really talked much about till the Middle Ages, but was definitely a real historical figure. There's been lots of speculation, we'll probably talk about that later. There've been lots of programmes on television recently about Merlin, Camelot, and so on. And Arthur is a figure that has existed throughout history, seeing as as a person who is there to protect and defend the culture that he represents.
Okay, is King Arthur purely a myth then?
No, Arthur was a historical figure. What we're actually looking at are probably the myths that were written during the Middle Ages. We know that Thomas Malory wrote the Morte d'Arthur, which are a series of legends about King Arthur and his knights that became very popular during the Middle Ages. We also know that a lot of the Arthurian legends are French in origin as well, because we have to remember that while we have to remember that Celtic link. Northern France is Brittany. Breton is a language very similar to Welsh, and there would have been an Arthurian link there as well. A lot of the information that Malory used came from 12th and 13th century sources that were written in French, I would say very medieval French. And Arthur himself was there at a time, the legends emerged when we were in the middle of the War of the Roses. England was ripped in two during the Civil War, and people wanted to go back to a time when kings were respected and seen to fulfill very important roles of justice and whatever. Incidentally, the guy who wrote the Morte d'Arthur, the legends that fulfill most of things, was actually in prison for rape and violence at the time. So the Morte d'Arthur was written by Thomas Malory when he was locked up in prison. And it's quite interesting how people locked up frequently write great noble epics during the time. So the legends are about a gentler, kinder society where views and respect were present but were missing in the present time. They acted as an inspirational approach and a means by which people could look back to a mythic past. Arthur was reality, but the castle he probably lived in was probably built of wood and earth, and his troops probably rode without a saddle and a bridle, but they probably used spears and so on. But they weren't the knights of everyday legend that we see during the Middle Ages. That bit can add it on. The beauty of all legends is not that they're a lie, but that the figure of Arthur acts as an inspiration and as a means by which is interpreted in each new historical period as something to look back to. The good old days, yeah? The times when people were gentler and more just.
Okay, so what can you tell me about the Black Book of Carmarthen?
The Black Book of Carmarthen. Now, if we look at links with the Mabinogion, if we look at a lot of the Arthurian legends, they have a source there that is Welsh, Celtic, and the Black Book of Carmarthen largely tells us about the activities of Merlin, who was Arthur's wise man, if you like. There is some evidence, for example, that the Arthurian legend is pre-Christian as well. Arthur can be seen as a figure who existed in a sort of a Celtic dream time, where the country was part pagan, part Christian, and the figures in that are both folklore, both real, both godlike, both old pagan gods and more Celtic ideas. The myth of the search for the Grail can be seen in many layers, and there is a tradition, for example, we have the Arthur stone on Gower, which was supposed to be a stone that was taken from Arthur's shoe and thrown and then grew. We have the traditions of the link between the fairies and Arthur, the old Celtic wild people of the old beliefs. It may be that the fairies, are the pre-Christian believers of the area, and so that Arthur exists in this pattern between a Christian country and a pagan root. So what is a myth? I sometimes wonder. The idea of battling may be about resisting the Saxon invaders. It may even be an idea of resisting the early Christian church. The idea of going back to a simpler idea, a more green, pleasant, less concerned with sin and guilt, and more about enjoying oneself. Those themes are there in those traditional legends. So Arthur works on many levels. You can see, another figure we often talk about is Robin Hood. Robin Hood, if you like, can be seen as a later day King Arthur, living in the woods, resisting the Normans, waiting for a just king to return. These historical figures exist in many traditions in many ways. So, Arthur appeals to different people in different sorts of ways.
Yeah, so to say that a myth is really wrong, isn't it?
Well,
as such,
it's an oral tradition.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way to say it.
Okay. So, what can you tell me about Guinevere's love affair with Sir Lancelot, the wife of King
Well,
Arthur?
that can be seen in many layers. Sir Lancelot was, if you like, traditionally French, Christian, a knight. Guinevere was traditionally of the fairy folk, and was, if you like, representative of the land. The love affair may be symbolically representative of the development of something like Celtic Christianity, of the idea of the link between male and female, of one way of looking at the future. When I mention Celtic Christianity, a mixture of the old beliefs of the Celts and the more modern views of the Celts. If you think of the legend of the Grail, I'm sure many of you are aware of the saga of written by Dan Brown in what's the book?
The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
It talks about the Grail. Now, the Grail was not, traditionally speaking, the cup. The Grail was, if you like, a symbol for the womb of the land by which the tradition was pursued. And Lancelot's relationship with Guinevere on a purely sexual level can represent a mixture of the land and the new ways. So symbolically, the Grail and the sword, well, I don't have to give it to you, do I? It's a Freudian image, it's a phallic image of sexual union. And you can look at it in that way, as a means of a love affair between the new ways and the old ways to make a new way approach. King Arthur himself is presented as the cuckolded, the husband who Guinevere is unfaithful to. But you could also see Arthur as a representation of the old ways going down and the new ways emerging. You could also see other Arthurian knights like Sir Gawain as the knight of the old ways. And there's the old legend of Lady Ragnall and the Green Knight. King Arthur and Lancelot are riding through a wood, and they meet the Green Knight. And the Green Knight says to Arthur, answer this one question, and if you answer it correctly, my daughter will marry Sir, I think it's Sir Lancelot or Sir Gawain.
Right, yeah.
And what the story means is, he asked the question, what do women want? Now, I should point out that Lady Ragnall is a hideous, deformed figure. So Sir Lancelot, being a good man, Sir Gawain being a good knight, decides that he will marry Lady Ragnall. On their wedding night, this hideous woman is led into his chamber, and she gives him a choice. And she says, you've got a choice here. I can either be beautiful to you alone at night and hideous during the day, or be hideous hideous
during the day
and
beautiful at night.
And beautiful at night, or beautiful during the day and hideous at night. But if you get this question, so they think and think and think, and eventually he says, I want you to be truly who you are. And by being truly who she is, the curse is broken and she becomes beautiful all the time. So it's asking us to look beyond. The whole idea in Arthurian myth is that women had to be given choice. The coming of early Christianity played down the role of women. In the old Celtic tradition and in early Celtic Christianity, women were equal. But the traditional view of the church at that time after that was to keep women at bay.
Because you mentioned it was pre-Christian.
It was pre-Christian.
Yeah. Okay.
So the whole Arthurian legend, you see those complex arguments there? There are all sorts of things that we can interpret in many different ways. So that, you know, you really need to scratch a legend. The link with last week's programme on dreaming is that you can perceive a legend, a myth, folk stories, as a collective dream of people, a means of interpreting what's going on. So to myself, King Arthur, I see him as a representative of older ways, of more honest ways, of more traditional ways. To people of, say, like Margaret Thatcher, King Arthur would be seen as a nationalist, protecting his country against these strange foreigners. But you see, that's the beauty of myth. It appeals to people in different ways at different times. So we have to ask, why do certain Arthurian stories appeal to some of us and not to others? Why do certain ones help us understand? Why were stories written in so many different ways about King Arthur? There is, after all, an old legend that Merlin was the last priest of the moon who set out from Atlantis when Atlantis went down, landed in Wales and established the Druidic religion. There is all sorts of different traditions in that sort of ways. Legends catch fire to different people in certain times. Yeah. So, you know, please look beyond these obvious symbols and say, what does a particular myth mean to me and how does it represent?
Okay, right. So what was the relationship like between King Arthur and Sir Lancelot then?
Well, King Arthur, if we take him at the level I see him at, King Arthur was the last of one way of ruling, and Lancelot represents a new way coming in. So the tradition between Arthur and Lancelot is of a struggle between old ways and new ways. All things fall apart, all things change. Arthur and Lancelot represent the old ways and the new ways struggling against one another. So if you like, as Carl Jung would say, they fulfill an archetype, they tell a story. They tell a story about how resistance to old ways, that it's good for things to change, that it's good for battles to be fought, for struggles to be looked at. So remember, Lancelot, in the tradition, found the Grail, but the first time there, he didn't recognise it as the Grail. He found it the second time.
Right.
So Lancelot and Arthur had to go through this process of understanding what was going on. The battle at the end, where Arthur eventually goes down fighting against Mordred at the Battle of Bladen Hill, is a Pyrrhic victory where Arthur's ways change, but new ways begin. So we must look at struggles in that symbolic way. Arthur and Lancelot as both the old and the new, and the process of new and old, if you like. It's old Hegel's philosophical idea of one force working against another force produces a third force. So it's like a model for two sides of a personality battling, in which new ways can be looked at and new ways can be examined and new insights can be made.
Okay, so who was the Lady of the Lake?
Now this is an interesting point. The Lady of the Lake is one of these traditional figures. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Isis was the goddess of the sea. The idea of the sea and of water is that water represents the unconscious, it represents the more ancient, the older ways of interpreting the world. A female figure is being presented there as bringing out of the unconscious, out of the hidden, out of the sea of the past, the water of the past, something that will be used again. It's the idea of the feminine as ever recreating, ever reforming, which can only be done when a more male, rational way has collapsed. That is the way by which new things are made in the future, new approaches are seen. That the old rational view is often initially overwhelmed by an irrational, unconscious view. The sword, which is often a symbol of thought and quickness, rises out of the waves, out of the lake, and that sword is kept safely there. But that new way can only be linked into the feminine, to the water, to the unconscious. And without that, no change happens. All people go through a position of rising and falling, be it Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, King Arthur, anybody like that. The old ways give way to the new, and out of the chaos and the disorder of the emotions comes a new way.
Procession, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
But evolution, adaptation, unconscious to conscious, irrational to rational. The Greeks had the god Dionysius of passion, fighting Apollo, the god of rationality and order. It's the same sort. The old ways change, but the tradition remains the same.
So how did Merlin figure in King Arthur's life?
Merlin is effectively a sorcerer, a wise man, a druid, a very early psychotherapist, a very idea of the old Celtic ways, that the new Christian ways aren't all that they're cracked up to be, they need the old ways. Merlin is there as a figure of advice, of understanding. It's Merlin who identifies, helps Arthur learn how he should reign. It's Merlin who can be seen as Gandalf. Gandalf is Merlin.
There's influences there, isn't there?
There's influences there.
Merlin, King Arthur, Gandalf,
all that
sort of arguments,
yeah, all that sort of thing. Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, the wise man who lives in the desert, who has gone there, who brings new ways of looking at things. All the figures in the Arthurian myth are archetypes in a classic Jungian sense, by which new ways are brought in, but old views and old traditions are useful for that interpretation.
Okay, well, thanks very much for coming on the show again, Martin. Is there anything you'd like to add, or something that maybe I've missed out?
I think really you've got to, if you consider, we are now in a situation in the country where everything seems to be disintegrating, and the old legends seem to be more and more popular at times when we go through economic and social disorder. We're looking for models in the past. It's no accident that in the last few years we've had 5 series of Merlin on TV, we've had Camelot, we've had numerous Arthurian stories.
Of course, yeah, you've had Monty Python's taken it as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Humour as well.
Humour, yeah.
Yeah, they all fulfil a role at a particular time of looking at how we can deal with things and understand things.
Okay, well, thanks very much once again for coming on the show, Martin. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always.
Thank you.
And I've enjoyed listening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's all we got time for today, guys. But tune in for next week's show, where, well, we're not going to tell you what the topic is. We always keep it secret as always. But that's all for now. Take care.